What is up, everyone? Moving back again with another top 10 movie list. This is going to be my top 10 horror movies of the 1980s. Now, this might contradict my top 10 favourite movies of all time a little bit, because there are two movies on this list, but they're not first and second. I've took into consideration how good I actually think they are, and how rewatchable and how much nostalgia I have, and balanced them out with those two movies that are on this list. Now, this was a request by one of my subscribers called Mark Jones, so here you go, Mark. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I had a lot of fun coming up with this list. Now, I do have some honourable mentions before I get to the top 10, but this was a very hard list to make, very, very hard. I've got 5 honourable mentions because I did want to put them in, and I just couldn't. I didn't feel like I just think the top 10 had something more about them. And let's all be honest, the 1980s is probably the biggest decade for horror movies. I don't know if it's the best, but this is where horror movies exploded, and everyone was trying to get a piece of the action, and we've got all sorts of horror movies from this decade, haven't we? But a lot of fun horror movies came out in this era, and some of these on this list are just some of the best horror movies ever made, in my opinion. So before we get on with the top 10, I've just got to get on with the honourable mentions and give them a quick shout. Okay, for my honourable mentions, I do have the first Nightmare on Elm Street on this list. Now, the reason that's there is I don't think it's the best Elm Street movie, but it started a massive franchise off, and one of the horror's most iconic movie villains, and it is a very good film. So that just missed out. I'm not a big fan of the first movie as other people, but I do respect it in a big way. Also have Child's Play on there for the same reasons. It started a massive franchise and an iconic villain. One of my favourite iconic movie villains of all time. So just missed out Child's Play. I do actually think some of the sequels are better than the first one, but they weren't in the 1980s, so we haven't got that on there. We've also got Friday the 13th. That film used to scare me as a kid so much, and I love the way it's all done from a first person point of view, and you know, the twist ending, you think it's Jason, and that just started a franchise once again, didn't it? And I don't think, looking back on it now, it's as good as what it used to be, because it's very laughable now, but it's still an important movie. But that just missed out too. And we also have Day of the Dead, a movie I spoke about in my top 5 zombie movies of all time. If you want to check that out, I will leave the link below. I love that movie, but these 10 just had a bit more about them. But it is one of the best zombie movies of all time, and that was out in 1985. So to me, that is the best zombie movie of the 1980s. And we also have, this might scare a few of you off, but we also have The Thing. Yes, The Thing is not in my top 10 horror movies of the 1980s. Look, the reason for that is it just doesn't connect with me like it does with other people. I do really respect the movie, and I think it's a very, very good movie, a very solid 8 out of 10 in my opinion. But I've watched that film about 5 times now, and I just totally disagree when people say it's the best horror movie ever made, or the best horror movie of the 80s. I just have to disagree with that. But I do think it's a very well made film, and the special effects are fantastic in that film. But they are my honourable mentions, guys. Sorry, I was just checking the list to make sure there's no more, but they are my 5 honourable mentions. So let's just crack on with the top 10. Okay, guys, coming in at number 10, this might be a surprise for some of you, and it's a bit of an underrated movie in my opinion, and that is Psycho 2. Yes, a lot of people might have thought this was a cash grab for the absolute classic that Hitchcock made in the 60s, but this is a very, very surprising sequel. This follows Norman Bates, and he's been locked away in a mental hospital for the past 22 years, and he's been declared sane and is allowed out, and he comes back to the house where he lived with his mother in the first movie, and murders start to take place again, but we see it from all different angles, and we're not quite sure if it's Norman or someone else. Norman's not quite sure if it's him or someone else. It's a really well done whodunit movie, and with lots of horror elements, some decent kills in there. and I think it's a very underrated sequel. And Quentin Tarantino actually said that he prefers Psycho 2 over Psycho 1. So that's not a comment to be ignored. If you haven't seen Psycho 2, I would definitely give it a watch. So number 10 for me is Psycho 2. Coming in at number 9, we have American Werewolf in London from John Landis. Now, this is the best werewolf movie of all time, in my opinion. There's a little bit of comedy in there, but there are some very scary scenes, to be honest, especially the dream sequences. Like a bunch of Nazis that look like pigs knock at his door and just blow away his family, and it's a really creepy scene. There's other ones where he's in the woods and he's just like biting animals' heads off like raw, and this is all as he's turning into this werewolf. And let's not forget the werewolf scene where he does actually turn. The special effects are fantastic for the time, and it's just a really good little story, and I can actually watch over and over again. It's a brilliant horror comedy. But I think the horror is actually more than the comedy in this movie. There are some scary scenes. So yeah, number 9 is An American Werewolf in London. Absolute classic, that one. Coming in at number 8, we have Clive Barker's Hellraiser. This is a very strange movie. It's a very original story. This is about a woman called Julia, and she moves into this house, and her ex-lover used to live there called Frank, and he was cursed to hell for trying to do this little puzzle box that is linked to these Cenobites, like Pinhead and stuff, who live in hell. And she brings him back, but in order for him to get fully human again, he must feed on dead bodies. So he tells Julia to bring a few male characters back to the house and pretend that she basically wants to have sex with them, and when they're not looking, she will kill them, and Frank will feed on their bodies and become more human with each one he consumes. And it's just a very interesting little idea. But what stands out to me in this movie is how Pinhead is on the front of all these Hellraiser covers, and he's hardly in the movie. He's only really in it for the last 20 minutes, I think. But he is an iconic villain, but he's not really in the movie. It's a strange sort of twist, but when he does come with these Cenobites, all hell breaks loose, excuse the pun, and it's just a really good time. A really strong horror movie, Hellraiser, and I think there's about 9 of them now, which this did start a massive franchise. One of the weakest horror franchises, but the first one and the second are not to be looked down upon. So my number 8 for me is Hellraiser. Coming in at number 7 is a movie I first watched only a couple of years ago and instantly fell in love with it, and that is The Burning. This all takes place in a camp with all these teenagers, and I love the setting of these camp movie, like horror camp style movies like Friday the 13th and stuff, where they're all taking place in cabins and just a load of people are getting killed. I love those type of films. But this all starts from a prank on the caretaker called Cropsy, and they burn him accidentally, and I think he just about lives, and he comes back to the camp a few years later and just starts killing all these teenagers one by one. And it's just a really well put together slasher movie, and it's one of the best slasher movies of all time in my opinion. But there's this one scene where these teenagers are on a raft, and it's one of the most brutal, gory scenes I've ever seen in a movie, and it's just fantastic. And Cropsy always has these big shears. It's a bit of a strange weapon of choice, but it works. I think The Burning is a fantastic slasher film, and that's why it's so high on this list. So number 7 is The Burning. Number 6 is a Stephen King adaptation, and that is Pet Sematary. Absolute classic movie. Quite a scary film. Stephen King actually said that this was his scariest book to write, and he actually scared himself writing it, but it's well put together on screen. And this is basically about this family whose pet is killed, and they bury it in this cemetery because word of mouth around this little place that they live is the animal will come back if you bury it there, because this cemetery is based on an Indian burial ground. And the cat does come back, but not as before. It's more like got this evil charm about it. It just wants to scratch everyone and stuff. And when family tragedy strikes, they decide to bury a family member there to bring him back. And it's the worst idea they could have come up with, because when he comes back, this little child of theirs, he is on a killing spree, and it's just a really well original idea. But there's the main female star's sister in this. She keeps having flashbacks of her sister who was really sick at one time, called Zelda, and oh my god, she is so creepy, terrifyingly, just sends shivers up your spine every time she comes on. She is terrifying, and she's actually played by a man, which makes it even more weird. But Pet Sematary is a fantastic horror movie. The remake was okay, but it's not on this. If you're going to watch one of them, go to this one. So number 6 is Pet Sematary. Okay guys, coming in at number 5, I've spoke about this movie in my top 10 favourite movies of all time, because it's so rewatchable to me, and that is The Lost Boys. Bit of a horror comedy, this one. There is more comedy than horror, but it's definitely a horror movie too. What else can I say? Just a fantastic soundtrack, fantastic characters. The characters really make the movie. You know, got the Frog Brothers, got Corey Haim's character Sam, you know, to Kiefer Sutherland as, what's his bloody name? David, and his little cronies, the vampires. It's just a really good film, and it all takes place in this little seaside town in America, where there's like a carnival every night that these teenagers can go to, and these vampires are just picking people off one by one at this carnival, or theme park if you like. And it's just a brilliant film. If you haven't seen The Lost Boys, you were really missing out, but I think most of you will have seen that movie, and it's got all these 80s pop culture going on in it, and all this total 80s atmosphere. It's a fantastic movie. So number 5 is The Lost Boys. Okay, coming in at number 4 might be a little bit of a surprise here, because not many people talk about this movie, and I absolutely love it to death, and that is The Hitcher. Fantastic performance from Rutger Hauer. He just basically is this hitchhiker, and this guy picks him up, and he's acting really weird in the car, this hitchhiker, played by Rutger Hauer, and this guy doesn't want him in the car no more, so Rutger Hauer just makes his life hell. He is tormenting him all the way through the movie. He's killing people, so this guy can actually see him killing people and putting the shivers up him, and he's just really relentless. He just won't let this guy get a minute's peace, and it all takes place in this outback of America, and Rutger Hauer is just fantastic as John Ryder. He's a really mysterious villain, but there's some brilliant scenes in this movie. Like, he pulls I don't mean brilliant, but I mean gory. Like, he pulls this female character from one truck to the other by pulling her apart and stuff. And there's another where our main protagonist is just eating these chips in a cafe very slowly, and as he picks the next one up, there's a finger instead of a chip. It's just a fantastic film, it really is. So underrated, and I'm glad to own it on Blu-ray. I finally got it last year in a nice little set. But The Hitcher is a fantastic, underrated horror movie from the 80s. If you haven't seen it, you've got to go and watch it now. Trust me. So number 4 is The Hitcher. Coming in at number 3, I can talk about this movie all day. This was on my top 10 favourite movies of all time list. And because of the nostalgia and the rewatchability of it, it's the one I've watched the most in the franchise. It is A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 3. In my opinion, the best Freddy movie. You've got great characters like Terran and Kincaid, and that guy is the Wizard Master. It all sounds a little bit stupid if you haven't seen it, but it's well put together. It all takes place in this mental institution where these kids are all having the same dream about Freddy. Freddy is borderline comedy and borderline scary. This is like the perfect balance, and there's some really good kills in this film. We have the guy with the veins walking down the corridor. We have Jenny, who just gets thrown through the TV by Freddy's big robotic arms, and it's got a good little final third act. And Nancy returns, Heather Langenkamp, who was in the first movie, the main final girl if you like. It's just a really well put together horror movie and really well thought out, and I just love it. I love it to death. If I go back to A Nightmare on Elm Street and watch one of them, I'm usually going to pick this one or Part 2. I just have a lot of nostalgia for it. But without the nostalgia aside, it is a brilliant horror movie. So number 3 is A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 3, The Dream Warriors. Okay, coming in at number 2, a very, very well-made movie by Stanley Kubrick, and that is The Shining. I actually thought this was the best horror movie of all time at one point. I don't think it is now, but it's definitely in my top 5. And obviously, there's another one on this list that's above this, but this is so well put together. I can imagine being in the cinemas in 1980 watching this, being scared to death, because there's some scenes that are just imagery that weren't like that back in that day. Like the 2 girls just flashing on screen, them 2 twins, or just a bunch of dead bodies in the hall with the axes lying next to them, and the scene where Danny goes into room 237. That is so creepy. And not Danny, sorry, Danny goes in, and his dad, played by Jack Torrance, is it? He just goes in and sees this woman get out the bathtub, and when he gives her like a bit of a snog, and when he lets go, it's just this old woman that's just falling with flesh falling off it and stuff. It's so weird. And even the scene that's not meant to be scary, where Danny realizes he had The Shining with the guy who the caretaker at the hotel is, and he just looks at him without moving his lips, and you just hear him sort of read his mind and go, "How would you like some ice cream, Doc?" That actually scares me, because the music comes in and stuff. It's just a really creepy film about a guy who's just losing his mind. And Stephen King is not a fan of this movie because Stanley Kubrick took his own take on it, and that's understandable, but I think Stanley Kubrick actually done a great job of this movie. And it's a lot of people say lately that they look back on it and don't really like it as much, but I watched it about 6 months ago and I still loved it. So yeah, number 2 is The Shining. Okay guys, getting to number 1, there might be a little bit of controversy here, because the first one is definitely 100% a horror sci-fi movie, and this has more action, but it's still a horror in my opinion. I looked it up on IMDb, all over the net, and I asked people on Twitter, and they do actually think it's still a horror movie, and that is Aliens. Look, this just isn't the best horror movie of the 1980s. This is one of the best movies of all time. I've spoke about it on the channel a couple of times now. James Cameron was absolute genius with this film. He took what the first movie had and totally twisted it around. And in my opinion, this is better than the first one. It's just got everything. My uncle, it's his favourite movie. And he always said, I watch this movie and think, how is this going to get, like, how can you get better than this when you're watching it? You just can't, because every scene is just, nothing's wasted. It's just perfect. I can't find a single fault with this film. I can't. And there's some great scenes, like Ripley has to go back at the end and get Newt from this queen alien that's sort of kidnapped her and put her down there with all these eggs around. So there's definitely a lot of horror elements to this film. And James Cameron, what he nailed here more than anything is the characters. Every single one of them you can relate to, and not relate to, but you find something you like in each one of these characters. And there's just so many good ones, like Ripley, of course, and Vasquez, who's just a total badass. And, you know, you got Burke, who's the sly little slime ball. Just everything about Hudson, how can you forget Hudson, you know what I mean? Got Corporal Hicks. There's so many great quotes. I can go on about it all day, I really can. And I can watch this movie at any time. If this is on TV and it's halfway through, I will just watch the rest. I just love it. It's absolutely brilliant. So my number 1 pick is Aliens. Okay guys, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I love my horror and I enjoyed making this list. Mark, thanks for the shout. I really enjoyed doing this. Maybe I might do a top 10 90s horror movies or a top 10 70s horror movies, who knows. Or maybe like an even top 10 action movies. There's lots of ideas for top 10s. So I hope you all enjoyed the video guys. What do you think? Do you agree with my list? If you leave a comment below, I will reply to every single one of you, I promise. And if you want more videos, please just hit the subscribe button. It's up to yourselves. And I've got a lot more videos coming. So yeah, take it all easy, guys. And I'll see you all on the next video. Take it easy. See you later.